All right, a busy week for the NFL and the Buffalo Bills as rosters trimmed down to 53. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast, everyone. I am Kevin Carroll. I almost said 35.
35?
I don't know. It flipped in my head. That's Jon Scott, everybody.
Jon Scott in shock right now because Kevin, we just talked about how Kevin and I enjoy doing things live. And while most of you will be listening to this recorded, we tape as live. And Kevin, this is a tall hill for you to go on, considering your live work oftentimes contains flaws.
The important part of this, John, is that I said it properly, but then foolish me had to point out the fact that I almost screwed up. John, because you know why? A very busy couple of days around the NFL. So sometimes you get so much on your plate and there's so many things that you think are important to get to with the Bills that, I don't know, maybe your description of the podcast doesn't come out quite the way you want it to, because there's a lot to get to with what happened with the Buffalo Bills as they got the roster down to 53 players. They made some other moves. They got the practice squad together, getting ready now to just focus on the Jets. But we got business to attend to because a lot went down over the last couple of days to start the week.
Yes, and I want everyone to be able to clearly hear all of the information and conversation we're about to have. So I'm going to ask you once again, for our listeners' benefit, the microphone that's right in front of your face that our wonderful viewers on YouTube who are liking and commenting and subscribing to the Buffalo End Zone YouTube page, they're not the only ones who can get the information because they want to hear you by talking directly into a microphone. We'll get into how long you've been doing this at the end of the show, but I will bestow that knowledge, a little tip here of the trade, that it best suited if you talk into the microphone.
All right. Thanks for the tip. Let's start off with the big Von Miller news to start the week, John. I don't think it was a surprise to you. Wasn't a surprise to me. Probably not a surprise to most. But Von Miller going to stay on the physically unable to perform list, so he is going to miss the first 4 weeks of the season, and that playing a role in how the 53-man roster ended up shaping up. So we'll jump off there because no one wanted to hear that. Everyone wanted him to be there week one against the Jets, but that was kind of unrealistic.
And I had said over the weekend and leading into this that, yes, this, of course, we were all in agreement that this was the most likely outcome that was going to happen going into the regular season. Brandon Beane, though, indicating they went back and forth because the thought was Von Miller might have been able and close to begin practicing in the next week or so or whatever, but it wasn't going to be, hey, he's ready to play in a game by week one. Von Miller wanted to do that. That wasn't the timeline. Maybe. Could he have potentially played, I don't know, week 2 or week 3 or something? Maybe. But I think at the end of the day, Brandon Beane making it clear the long-term view is what he was ultimately going with. And I'll be honest with you, Kevin, I think it was as much as let's not rush the process with Von Miller as it was let's not rush the process in an already crowded and challenging decision at the defensive end position. If we can keep Von on PUP, he'll be out at least 4 weeks. Then they can open up a 21-day practice window. So that means he's not even on the active roster. He doesn't have to be on the active roster for like the first 7 weeks, should it need to get that far. That delays the decision-making of another one of the guys at the defensive end position, which we will get into shortly. One move they had to make, and another one's going to have to come when Miller becomes on the active roster.
Yeah, when I look at Von Miller and the type of player he is, the type of personality he is, I'm just throwing this out there, John. You're looking at the Jacksonville Jaguars game over in London. When Von Miller could return, you mentioned the practice window on when he can start practicing with the team. Von Miller, the type of guy at this stage in his career where he's so ramped up to go, if he's ready to go, say he's ready but he can't practice with the team by, say, week 3, is that a decision? I know we've talked about this before. You're going over to London. You have all that other stuff to deal with. Doesn't make sense. but Von Miller's Von Miller. I'm going to assume he's going to be like, I'm raring to go at this point.
Brandon Beane says we'll deal with that and approach that when we get there. Once the 4-week window closes, he cannot even practice in pads or anything until the full 4 weeks are up. So then leading into week 5 is when he can take the field. I agree with you. Von's going to say, well, I've been working out off to the side. I'm a vet. I've already missed more time than I want to. Get me on the field that first week. But most people, it's like he's starting training camp, right? Mm-hmm. And it takes a few weeks for guys and their bodies to ramp up with the football stuff. Physically, he will probably be fine. But it's the contact, it's the different cuts that you get in live action football. I think he's going to need at least 1 full week of strictly practicing and then add another, I think, before he should, I will say, take the field.
I think Beane also mentioned that on top of all that, he's not able to really do football stuff in his full uniform until then. And that's even an adjust. You could be in the league 20 years, and still have to adjust to having your uniform back on. So I'm with it doesn't make sense to me, even if he wants to go in London, to even bother doing that. So then probably I'm eyeing the week after the London game when he gets into the mix.
Yeah, and let's not forget, with the London game, there is a very unique travel aspect to it. We don't know for sure. My assumption is with the game on Sunday, unlike the last time the Bills were there and they spent the entire week, teams have really figured out you don't need to do that. The Bills, I'm assuming, will practice Wednesday, Thursday in Orchard Park. Thursday after practice, fly on over with the time change. And who knows what type of practice they will do on a Friday. Fridays are light anyways when they're in their home facility. I'm assuming it would be light, if not a little lighter, once they're across the pond. Saturday is a walkthrough, so he may be even losing 1 day of traditional practice with that unique week of going to London. So I agree with you. I think he will push, and it will be a talk, and it'll go all the way right up to game time. But my assumption is that the best case for this would be, or the best scenario that I think the Bills would like to be comfortable with, is maybe Von has at least a week or two of practice before hitting the field.
Good to be over there in London if a decision's made, be there with the team to break that all down. John, one of the things as we talk about defensive end that kind of sparked the idea that maybe Von Miller wasn't going to be on the PUP before all that came out, came reports, and then, of course, the Bills made it official. Boogie Basham, the guy, and you had talked about this all summer long, that you expected a trade before the 53-man roster comes out, and it's going to be a name that was a draft pick that was rather high, and it ends up Boogie Basham traded to the Giants. And the compensation, John, doesn't look real good to the layman here on the get that the Bills ended up getting back to what they gave their friends over there at the New York Giants.
Boogie Basham is a second-round pick, surprising second-round pick in 2021, especially after in 2020. The Bills' first pick in that draft, but a second-round pick on A.J. Epinesa, edge rusher. First pick of the 2021 draft, Greg Rousseau, edge rusher. Then they doubled down with Boogie Basham in the second round. For a second-round pick just 2 years ago, the Bills send Basham and a seventh-round pick in 2025 for a Giants sixth-round pick in 2025. It's better than nothing because Boogie wasn't making the team. So rather than cut him, this is the move that's smart. We saw a lot of them yesterday with not super big names, but instead of just throwing him out there for nothing and he isn't going to make the team, you get some sort of compensation, sixth-round pick. I mean, who knows? Tyler Bass, a sixth-round pick. There's things you can be done with those.
Tom Brady was.
Never heard of him. But you're right. It's only 2 years. But the reality, I give Brandon Beane credit of not feeling prisoner to the pick. Of, hey, it's a second-round pick. It didn't work out. I'm not going to lock into this guy and get rid of a player who we feel can better suit us and help us now simply because he's a second-round pick 2 years ago. I applaud him for that. And let's be honest, as you said, the writing was kind of on the wall. Boogie, of anyone, I think he played his best ball over the past month plus of training camp and preseason. But still,
well, that was the thing. Like, we talked about that, and you noticed it in preseason games. Boogie was someone you noticed out there, and he was having a solid camp. But then, when it comes down to the bottom line, John, a decision had to be made. I think I saw reports that A.J. Epinessa's name was also floated out there, but ultimately they move on from Boogie Basham.
It was crowded before they signed Leonard Floyd. Then you bring in Leonard Floyd, and you're doing the math in your head, and 5 is really the magic number. And 5, it wasn't going to fit. I mean, I found a path in my projection in the show we had after the third preseason game to get 5 on there, and that was Vaughn staying on the pup. But long term, that wasn't going to happen. Shane Ray's injury kind of allowed also for Boogie to maybe latch on Shaq Lawson, but it's still Kingsley Jonathan. We talked about him over the past few shows. Once Eric Washington was asked about him, and he said he's been incredibly impressive in camp. Like I said on that show, or I put the antenna up. I didn't think it was enough, but Brandon Beane, lo and behold, said today, I wanted him to stay on the team a year ago and couldn't find a spot for him. They luckily got him back on the practice squad. He says, I was not going to not put him on the roster again this year. Good for an undrafted guy to beat out a second-round pick, but it also, I think, is also just another real big indictment on how big of a miss the Basham selection was.
Yeah, and with Kingsley Jonathan, a rather feel-good story. The kid's played his college ball at Syracuse. There was a lot of talk about him, and then he impressed, and as you said, a lot of talk about him. I didn't think it was going to happen. I got to be honest with you. But after hearing from Beane today, and after you giving me a little more information from being there every day after training camp broke from Rochester, that's a move right there that I think, as far as depth goes, is good, John. I want to address another day 2 pick traded after a few years under Brandon Beane before we move on from this topic, because we're here. It happened last year. It's happened before. I don't have a problem. I got to be honest with you. I don't have a problem with it. I don't think there's an issue there. I mean, it just happens. Sometimes you swing and you miss. You look at other positions where they hit on. It's hard for me to say, well, they don't know how to draft on day 2.
This is hilarious because I had a really spirited conversation, we'll call it, with a guy in my softball team this summer about Brandon Beane and his draft success rate. And his stance was he doesn't care if Kyer Elam, as a first-round pick, doesn't pan out, if Christian Benford, the 6th-round pick, pans out. He considers it a wash. Some people don't care if the second-round pick Boogie Basham doesn't pan out, if Greg Rousseau pans out as the first-round pick or whatever. He did not get fixated on the place of the pick as long as the hits were there.
Yeah.
Where do you fall? Is that the stance you stay? As long as the roster is still good, you don't care how.
Right. So the ultimate goal is to put together a winning franchise and go out there and win a championship. And, nothing is ever set in stone. You'll hear coaches talk about this. You'll hear general managers talk about it. That it doesn't matter where you're drafted. If someone is going to give us a better chance at winning than you, then that's the person that you're going to go with. And as long as you have that team in place, I mean, it happens all the time throughout sports in general that there are just people that weren't looked at highly coming out of college or wherever, and then they end up hitting at a different level. It's really weird, but as long as you got that roster that you needed to move forward, I'm totally fine with that.
I think Brandon Beane is a great general manager. I will just say that. I think he's a great general manager. He's done a tremendous job with the Bills. I do, though, think we are approaching a point where you can't miss on day 1 and day 2 picks.
Okay.
Now, you also, what is the definition of a miss? Or what is the definition of a hit? I think that's another thing. I'm looking at this. We'll obviously keep this current draft class, which has a good look starting. Dalton Kincaid looks good. Osiris Torrance is likely going to start at right guard. It looks like these guys are going to be, at least in the fold. But last year, Kaiir Elam, he's 4th or 5th on your cornerback depth chart.
Right.
4th. James Cook, all right, that looks fine. Terrell Bernard, now maybe he starts. If he starts, then I think everybody thinks the Terrell Bernard pick is good. Khalil Shakir, 5th-round pick. I think once you get 5th, 6th, 7th, I don't think people have an issue. Greg Rousseau, he seems to be ascending. Had a good year last season. Boogie Basham, gone. Spencer Brown, a lot of questions there. And then you get into the 5th round. A.J. Epinesa, contract year. He was a 2nd-round pick in 2020. If he's not brought back, is that a hit or a miss? Because he was with your team for 4 years. Zach Moss, gone. Gabe Davis looks like a hit. Then you get into the 5th round there. 2019, Ed Oliver, they re-signed him. Does that simply make him a hit?
Right.
Cody Ford, miss. He's gone.
Right.
Devin Singletary, he's a running back. He started for you for 4 years. Is that a hit or a miss in the 3rd round? And do you view Singletary and Moss as like together with James Cook? Of why do they keep drafting running backs? I think it's all a matter of perspective. Dawson Knox was the 3rd-round pick as well. And then obviously Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds, Harrison Phillips. The 2018 draft, Beane's first with the team, was sensational here. I just think really to the bigger point, and we say this on this show sometimes even with Josh Allen, just because Beane has had great success building the roster does not make him impervious to criticism. Just like Josh Allen is an all-world quarterback, one of, if not the best in all of football, it is fair to criticize him when he makes mistakes. I don't think Beane would shy away from this. He was pretty open and frank and said, I missed this one with Boogie Basham.
Yeah.
So I think it's fair to criticize him for the misses, and I think it's important to also give him credit for the lower picks. But I do think at some point, with the value of what a 1st, 2nd, and 3rd-round pick is, no one bats 100, bats 1,000. But I think you maybe want more super impact rather than just starters.
Yeah. You mentioned Josh Allen right there. Good quarterback, John. Pretty good quarterback in Josh Allen with the Bills. The problem is the backup quarterback position right now. You have Matt Barkley on IR and Kyle Allen. Not impressive to the person outside, but to people inside of One Bills Drive, I think you hear it from Coach McDermott. You hear it from Brandon Beane. Talk about all that goes into coming in and learning and getting up to speed with everything. And by the way, if Kyle Allen is coming in to play quarterback, and this was mentioned earlier, that they're not running Josh Allen's offense with Kyle Allen. They will have to come up with something else. God forbid something happens to superstar Josh Allen. But they're in a bit of a pickle right now, and I know it was brought up that another quarterback is on the way.
I asked Brandon Beane about the backup quarterback situation because Matt Barkley on injured reserve, done for the year. A lot of people, including myself, didn't think he'd make the team, but thought that he would be a practice squad guy. With Allen's performance, Beane said he thinks he's did some good things, admitted the turnovers were really where he needed to clean things up. But as you indicated, this offense is really complex. It's not something that you really can just pick up and go if you have no experience in it. Beane referenced a conversation he had a year ago with Case Keenum, who admitted to the Bills general manager he didn't have a comfortable grasp on what the Bills offense was until well into the season, the regular season. And remember, we've discussed, especially the first preseason outing for Keenum was a nightmare. And now he rallied beyond that and looked better last preseason than Kyle Allen ever did in this one. So I think there is a grace period there. It will be very intriguing, and unfortunately, we're taping this podcast on Wednesday night. Brandon Beane said they're shoring up the quarterback they're going to sign for the practice squad, and that should be made official on Thursday. So those of you who will be listening to this will be a little bit dated, but when you hear and read the name, I'll be curious, is it a young quarterback that the Bills are trying to develop so they don't have to have this revolving door with Josh Allen's backup? Maybe the way they looked at the Trey Lance inquiry a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it a veteran who they hope could potentially push Kyle Allen once they're comfortable with the offense to maybe be an option should Kyle Allen ever be thrust into action, it doesn't work, they have another veteran who could maybe be the backup instead.
Yeah, because of how this is all unfolding, I'm not even going to speculate. I have names running through my head, but we'll just see how it all ends up playing out. You know, we've mentioned Kaiir Elam, John, a lot off the top in the situation he's in, a first-round draft pick who's now buried on the depth chart now that everything is said and done at this point. Let's take a look at the defensive back situation right now, and you have Kaiir Elam. I don't know what you think. I think Christian Benford has done enough to be the day one starter opposite Tre'Davious White, but I do think they might lean towards Dane Jackson and the veteran presence out there, so I'm still split on that. And, of course, there's no reason, and they're never going to tell us what is going to happen on Monday Night Football, who's going to be out there first, or if it even matters. On paper, someone's a starter, but they're splitting up playing time.
I was in the Christian Benford's going to start Monday Night Football until Brandon Beane said that Dane Jackson had the best camp he's seen Dane Jackson ever have in his career. But that was part of the response of my question to Brandon Beane about Kaiir Elam. I felt, one, I was interested. Two, I felt if I'm going to put my opinion out there and say that I think it would have been best for them to trade him, I felt that it was also my responsibility as a reporter to ask the general manager, who didn't, just where he thinks Kaiir is. And Brandon said he thinks Kaiir has made great improvements. He says he thinks he's a good player. He's still young and developing. He also said that he thinks the quarterback competition between those three was highly competitive. It was close. It's not like Kaiir Elam is light years behind Christian Benford and Dane Jackson. Based upon playing time, what we saw in the preseason, it appeared that way. So maybe it's not. And Beane went on to say Kaiir Elam will play in games for the Bills this season, and he even said it may be week 1, it may be week 2. Who knows? So to me, is he maybe cracking the door a little bit to they may run a rotation again. They also, maybe they run more week-to-week scheme-based.
Or the hot hand. You know, if you have one guy out there who's playing against the Jets in week 1 and he's shutting everyone down, and Trey White is shutting everyone down, bring him into the next week. If someone craps the bed week 1 or is questionable, I know at times I was critical of Dane Jackson last year because when it was live and it was game action, sometimes to me it looked like other teams picked on Dane Jackson and threw at him constantly.
Maybe the way the Bills potentially will scheme up the wide receiver group, which is deep and a bit diverse, maybe they, with Sean McDermott calling plays, maybe his game plans will include, we feel play more press man this week would work, and let's go with Kaiir Elam. We feel we got to go real zone heavy, so we're going to go more with Dane. Who knows what that could be. But Brandon Beane making it clear, at the very least, that they are not out on Kaiir Elam. And again, I wasn't suggesting that because I think he's a bad player. I just, again, we're not going down the road, but if Christian Benford is truly ahead of Kaiir Elam right now, and they're the same draft class, and they're both young, and Dane Jackson's not that old, I just don't know what Kaiir Elam can do in a practice setting unless they're letting all three of them play in the game to jump ahead of them. barring any sort of injury.
Right, I agree with you on that. John, one of the guys that you and I both said would make the 53-man roster, Cam Lewis, continues to impress in his career and what he keeps putting out there year after year. In fact, Brandon Beane very highly when talking about the defensive back during the Bills press conference.
And he's always on the bubble.
I know.
I told you he was my bubble guy. I thought Kyer Elam wouldn't be on the team, so Cam Lewis would be. Then obviously that flipped. They both are. And Beane said he tells players all the time that you need to look at what Cam Lewis does. It's not about the amount of reps you have. It's what you do with the reps. And it's the versatility. The guy started as a nickel corner, undrafted out of UB, works his way playing some outside, deals with a little bit of injuries, yo-yos between practice squad and the active roster, was moved to safety real late in training camp in the preseason a year ago. And the guy just, he finds a way. He noted his tackling, his ability to really develop into a core special teamer. He's a good utility piece to have in the secondary. And if anything we learned a year ago, it was that is incredibly valuable because it can flip real quick. And you could go from flush at multiple positions to really depleted just like that. And for Cam Lewis to be someone who can basically plug a hole anywhere in those back five spots is impressive.
Absolutely. The whole back five unit looking solid, John. And I want to preface this with there is some real either ignorant or foolish or just trolls out there looking to start crap with people. But the whole Damar Hamlin thing, start from yesterday, running through today, seeing some of the comments about him making the 53-man roster. And you and I were at camp. You and I watched everything. I didn't have a doubt in my mind that he had done enough to make the 53-man roster. He looked good. Put everything that happened last year aside, and you're looking at a player who's continuing on the path that he was already on. What happened in Cincinnati aside. So you have that. He's on the 53-man roster. At first, you see some of the insiders like, hey, I've heard Damar Hamlin's going to make it. Like in my mind, I read that and I'm like, yeah, no crap. Of course he made it. But then you get the nitwits and the responses, and this is the world we live in with social media and stuff, basically saying that, oh, no, the Bills did this as a charity move. They'd look so bad if they cut Damar Hamlin after last year. And I was glad to hear Brandon Beane address it. He's a lot more articulate than I am, that's for sure. But, just the nonsense that surrounded it after what you and I and everyone else in the media saw.
Brandon Beane said Damar Hamlin 100% earned his place on the 53-man roster. You're absolutely right. If what happened in Cincinnati never happened, you would have looked at Damar Hamlin throughout this entire preseason and said, oh, well, that guy's definitely one of their four best safeties. Mm-hmm. It was unquestioned. Who else were they going to keep? Dean Marlowe didn't do anything. Zane Anderson didn't do anything. None of these other guys that were on the roster at safety did enough to even put it into question. It was simply a matter of let's get Damar Hamlin in pads. Let's get Damar Hamlin in game action. Can Damar Hamlin, without hesitation, play the game of football as he once did before what happened in Cincinnati? If the answer to that question was yes, then he was always going to be on the 53-man roster. Now, if we turned on the TV and watched the games or at camp and you looked at him and you noticed he's thinking a lot, well, then that's where, okay, if he made the 53 or like if it's close, maybe that would have played a factor, but it wasn't close at all. Damar Hamlin was, without question, safety once again is arguably the strongest position on this roster. It was incredibly tested a year ago because we thought the same thing. But Damar Hamlin as your fourth safety is incredible depth. And yeah, he's just going to be a special teamer, probably. Right. If no one gets hurt. Taylor Rapp may see some time in different packages as the third safety. But still an incredible story, but one that should not be played down or thrown with that caveat of he didn't earn it, because the guy was one of their better standouts, I would say, of anyone on the roster throughout the preseason.
Yeah, and I believe Brandon Beane said this, that he knows players, he knows coaches. If players and coaches thought DeMar Hamlin was on this roster for charity and not someone who could help them win football games, they'd run him out on a rail. They wouldn't want him in the front office anymore if that's the way he's going to operate rather than build a winner.
You must have been going down some deep holes, man. I didn't see these comments. Maybe it's because it was such, to your point, I
was waiting for you to get to the station, so I rewatched the whole press conference.
Maybe it was something that was just like a non-story to me. I mean, it's not a non-story, but I guess I'm past the whole, DeMar is overcoming all of these hurdles and getting all these accomplishments. These comments that you're referring to of people, the naysayers and things like that, I didn't know that was a thing.
I'll tell you this. I searched for them just because you see one little thing like, all these people are saying that it was like a charity thing. So you click on something and then you go through all the comments and you just shake your head. Every now and then you would see someone like, hooray, good for him, he's earned it, blah, blah, blah. But like the split was more towards the negative, like it's just out there. There are just
how many of them were the fake DeMar Hamlin made the team?
Well, those are out there too.
Idiot.
That's not even the real DeMar Hamlin. John, you talk about the depth there at the cornerback position and wide receiver you brought up. Khalil Shakir did make the 53-man roster. To me, it got a little dicey there for a while over the summer, but I think you and I both agreed that he would be there. Banged up, didn't play in the final preseason game. Maybe that helped him, but here he is, and he was back at practice. Meanwhile, Justin Shorter to IR with a hamstring.
And this is where it gets interesting. So that means the Bills technically now only have 5 wide receivers currently on the active roster. And the guy that was kind of in that Justin Shorter, Khalil Shakir final battle was Andy Isabella, who they get back on the practice squad with Tyrell Shavers and Brian Thompson and Marcel Aitman. So 4 wide receivers on the Bills practice squad, with Isabella obviously the most notable for there. The question to me now is going to be, do they pull up a 6th onto the active roster, or more likely, because you would likely not play 6 wide receivers on game day, you just roll with 5, and if something happens to someone else, now you have a guy like Isabella, who Brandon Beane said he was very impressed with throughout training camp, who is just on your practice squad. You elevate him and bada bing, kind of to some extent what they did with Cole Beasley late last year.
Might I add this, that if you run with the 5 wide receivers, you still have, like I've been saying all of the time, Dalton Kincaid, the rookie tight end, who would basically be part of that mix to play that role in the slot, with Dawson Knox keeping his same position. So Kincaid a tight end, but while he's up there, a role to be played as a wide receiver kind of position as well.
Yeah, Isabella, I think, only finds his way onto the roster if something happens to Khalil Shakir or Deontay Hardy.
Yeah, okay. We agree on that. So the other thing is, I just want to, Gabe Davis named captain. That kind of caught me by surprise. But watching him during camp at St. John Fisher and the way he handled himself around the rest of the team, leadership qualities coming out of him. I just didn't see him being a captain, but now that I see it on paper and the Bills send out their list of captains, everyone else is the same, but wide receiver Gabe Davis now thrown into the mix. I think it's earned.
Sean McDermott, I believe, is the one who mentioned late last year, if I'm remembering correctly, was asked about leadership and things like that in the locker room, and he mentioned Gabe Davis on his own, and that took me back. I've never viewed Gabe Davis as a leader. That's not a criticism of his. He just always seemed to be, I'm going to take care of my own business my way. That wasn't. He seemed well liked and everything. Has a great relationship with Diggs and others. but I just never viewed it. But clearly, this is another step because it's voted by the team. The teammates do this. And so, super cool. It also, I think, you pair his elevation in terms of standing in the locker room amongst the team, paired with we'll continue to see if what we saw at training camp in the preseason works its way when the games actually count. But I think Gabe Davis is making a good case for himself to stick around. I will just add,
Okay.
Tremaine Edmonds was a captain on this team and had his best season a year ago in a contract year, and the money ultimately was too high for the Bills. If things continue to trend in this contract year for Gabe Davis, it may really benefit Davis, but ultimately be a deterrent for the Bills or something that, not deterrent's the wrong word, but be a negative for the Bills, because if things keep going up and up and up for Gabe Davis, he might price out for the Bills.
All right. Well, let's just stay positive. We'll just look at this season.
That's
right
positive
now.
for him. The man may get his bag.
We'll go to the offensive line, John. That was another big position battle. Osiris Torrance, like we said over the summer, he's there. McGovern back at practice today, so that was another good thing, seeing another key piece, a key pickup as they look to improve this offensive line during the offseason, back in the mix, because it looked questionable when McGovern went down.
Brandon Beane says all is good with McGovern. You said it. He was out there at practice. Our Andy Young had some good video he put on Twitter. What is it? X? I'll call it Twitter to the end. Of McGovern practicing on Wednesday. The only real shocks in terms of the initial 53, and we discussed it. I told you Alec Anderson was right on there for me.
Yes, you did. Yep.
I said that on Saturday after the preseason game. I never thought David Quessenberry looked good, but I thought that maybe based upon playing time and things like that, he was safe. Quessenberry out, Alec Anderson in, Ryan Vandemark, another guy that I forgot basically came to the team around this time a year ago from the Colts off of waivers or after cut day. So he finds his way, and that's how they rounded out. And then the Bills signing a day later, Jermaine Ifedi is a tackle and a guy that could potentially fill that swing role with a little more veteran presence.
Yeah, so give us a little background on Ifedi, if you can, on...
Wow, you're putting me on the spot. I can't give you that much background on him. You're the one who does all the research.
I know. I it's just by nature, the offensive line just really, it's hard for me to really dive deep into it, John. But we can move along to topic number.
Well, I'll get you something here. Thanks a lot.
What
dude.
were you doing out there all day?
He was a first-round pick by Seattle.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Back in 2016, the guy's played 102 games with 83 starts. He's a swing tackle. So he spent last year in Atlanta, played 17 games with no starts. Then it was in Chicago for a couple of years and began his first 4 years with Seattle. So there you go. I mean, he has a high talent with being a first-round pick. This is one of the very few times you could put me on the spot where I completely am unprepared.
No, I shouldn't have done that. I don't know. We can move on we can check that off. I was more concerned about pronouncing his last name correct and everything else, so I think I was locked in on that. Middle linebacker, John, continues to be a big question, a big concern going into this season, but again, another player back in Terrell Bernard, who was in the mix for that starting middle linebacker position. He was injured, really never got a chance to get out there during preseason games, but back in the mix, and from all we've heard, he is in the mix still. Don't just stare at me.
I can. We're on YouTube now. I can do that to our viewers. Terrell Bernard was back at practice. And he was participating in the individual portion of practice, which is all now that we get to see once preseason is all done. So for the 20 minutes I was out there, he looked good. He was running around. So Terrell Bernard, I would say, is once again in the thick to potentially start week 1. Now,
Christian Kirksey not signed as we record this podcast, John, but that was looked like a big surprise that he was released. And I think a lot of eyes popped open that there's a guy. There's a guy with experience. There's a guy that has had success in the league. If the Bills can get him, and it looks like everything but the signature on the dotted line has been done in this case.
On the practice squad, he will not be on the 53. So
Right.
Christian Kirksey is going to – there's 2 spots left on the practice squad. We already mentioned a backup quarterback will be signed by the time this comes out on Thursday morning. And then Christian Kirksey, it's just passing a physical. He will be a linebacker on the Bills practice squad. Is there a path for him to get up there? Sure. The Bills pursued him a couple years ago. Ultimately, he signed elsewhere. He's someone that's a veteran that could, should Dodson or Bernard not really work out. Sure, Balin Spector, hamstring injury, just like Justin Shorter, short-term IR. So he was not in the middle linebacker conversation, but that also potentially frees up a spot at the linebacker spot for him to, Kirksey, make his way onto the active roster. We'll see. As Beane said, he's a smart veteran guy. It shouldn't take him potentially that long to get up to speed with the defense.
So there you go. You have it right there. 53-man roster set, practice squad players in. You know, there's stuff going on right now that we don't see coming, and the roster will change and things will change as the season goes on. But as we stand here now, or sit, as we get ready for Bills-Jets Monday Night Football, it looks like everyone's set in place for that first game coming up. Let's get to a 3-and-out, John, before we go. My 22nd anniversary at this company under many different names over 22 years. Hard to believe. My dad and I still talk about this today. When he moved me out here from Massachusetts, we drove 9 hours without the radio on and just talked the whole way. I don't see a lot of that going on around the world right now. We didn't have these. We didn't have your iPhones, or then I probably would have ignored my dad the whole time and just sat there scrolling through Twitter. But hard to believe 22 years out here in many different capacities.
I'll address this in 2 ways. Number 1, Kevin put 7 to 8 pictures on Facebook illustrating and depicting his 22 years at the company. You know how many that I was in as someone who's been with you for nearly 10 of those? 0. And
Facebook post says otherwise. You can look it up.
And you put Casey Bortnick in there with him.
So here's the thing. I'm trying to get this across to you. I'm doing a Syracuse football special.
I do so much work at my job.
And while I'm waiting to get everything set up, someone hands me a certificate that says, congratulations, 22 years. You know, you get points to go to the store and get a watch or whatever like that. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. While I'm here, I'll go through my phone and find pictures. I do not have one picture of you on my phone of you and I doing work stuff.
Even though I've seen
have
on Facebook
900
a million.
They're all on Facebook, but I was going through my phone. Now, I did find 5 pictures of you and I golfing, smoking cigars, but I didn't think that worked in this case. Needless to say, I did find a picture of you and I when we had a bigger sports department. I'll just put it that way. Added that to the mix a little bit later on. And then I found all these shots of you and I doing this on my Facebook page where I'm like, well, I could have thrown that out. So that's on me. That's my bad. In 22 years, that's my biggest mistake.
And one final thing. I did a story with a guy who pitched for the Bisons who played for like 22, 25 minor league or independent ball teams. And I asked him if he could name every one of them. Can you name every name that this company has had since you've worked there?
Yeah. So I started at Cable 8 News in Jamestown, then moved to R News in Rochester. While in Rochester, we changed our name to YNN. They opened the Buffalo station. I moved from Rochester to Buffalo under YNN. We then switched to Time Warner Cable News, and then Spectrum News 1, and then another Spectrum News 1. So I think that covers it all. Sidetrack for 4 months or so with CBS in Rochester, but we struck that off the record here, and I came back and It's 22 years, John. You get into situations where you're young and in your 20s and you're going to take on the world. But as I try to tell everyone in my older age here, life happens. You know, you get married, you get happy, you enjoy your life, you enjoy doing what you're doing. And then the next thing you know, 22 years has gone by.
And you're too lazy to leave.
No, I'm in a good spot. I like what I got. I love what I got at this company.
All right, next topic.
You know who many people aren't loving what they got is the U.S. Ryder Cup team with JT on the roster for this one. Quite frankly, John, I love it. I'm going to tell you why. It's a team thing. It's all about chemistry. Those guys are all JT's buddy, Justin Thomas. I think it's going to work out. I think this is good for him. I think it's good for the rest of the team. I think this is all going to pan out well.
I love Justin Thomas. It's BS.
It is.
Because it should be performance-based. And unfortunately, what was already assumed and pretty much known is now been proven right, is that it's not about how you play and perform as much as it is who you are friends with. Obviously, we understand the resume of Justin Thomas.
But isn't that life?
Okay, fine. Does it make it right?
Well.
So, whatever. It like Brandon Beane missing on Boogie Basham as a second-round pick. It won't mean squat. Nobody will care if they win. But if Justin Thomas does not play well and the United States loses to Europe,
oh, there's going to be hell to pay if that
there you
happens.
go.
All right, final one, John. Of course, it's fantasy football season coming up. Drafts going on all the time. My college draft, run by my buddy named Sketch, he still wants to do it where everyone meets and writes down picks, and then he'll fill in the blanks a little bit later on, draw cards to see who goes first. Problem is, tends to have an issue with filling in the teams right when we fill out the it's 2023. I told him, cut the crap and just set something up online so we can just do it there.
You got quite a mouth on you today.
I know. I'm about to go on vacation. I don't know.
I've done this.
You can say this stuff on YouTube, right?
We're cable.
Yeah.
I enjoy in-person drafts. It's obviously so hard these days. As we're taping this, not like it matters. In about 20 minutes or so, I will be attending my second one with Bills media people, but you still do all the drafting on your computer. So that's the way it should go.
All right. Tell them thanks for the invite. Anyways, we'll be getting you ready for the Bills at the Jets Monday Night Football as we inch closer to the regular season. I would do the math on how far away we are from Monday Night Football, but I'll screw that up anyways. So John and I will catch back up with you next week as we get one step closer to the regular season. As always, thanks for tuning in.